Welcome to Decoding the Creative, a show about the uncharted waters of the artistic journey. In this episode, Ben talks to his bandmates John and Jesse from The Road to Milestone about the mystical arts of naming a band. Is a band name a brand, an identity, or a little bit of both? They explore all of this and so much more with a few tangents about Nigerian rappers and a SoundCloud artist named Little Toot thrown in for good measure. So anyway, without further ado, this is episode 9, What's in a Name?
All right, everybody, welcome to today's episode. I am super excited to be joined by two members of my band, The Road to Milestone. We got guitar player Jesse Buckwalter and vocalist Jonathan Gerlach here with us today. And I am super excited to have them because they are going to be joining us in a conversation today where we're going to be discussing a topic that doesn't really get discussed a lot, and that is the value of a project's identity and name. So specifically, we're going to be talking about a band's name is pretty much what it's about. And I think through the constant waves that happen in a creative project, anything can change. You've got the style change, you've got the storyline of a project could change, you've got the purpose of a project can change. But specifically in a musical project, I've noticed that there's been instances of bands completely doing a 180-degree turn. They changed their style. They've got a rotating door of members. Everything looks completely different, but yet they keep the name of the band. And now that is a conflicting opinion among fans and band members, management, people in the music industry. They've got their different opinions about why that's a good move or a bad move to keep the name of a project the same despite extreme changes. So with this topic in mind, I've invited Jesse and Jonathan from my band, The Road to Milestone, because they are a perfect example, this band as a whole, of a band who has persisted for many, many years past all the obstacles, member changes, genre and style changes, lyrical tone changes, etc. And still, the band has remained active, but still under the same moniker of The Road to Milestone. So I've invited them today because we're going to discuss the various reasons specifically, not just behind the Road to Milestone's reasonings, but other projects in general for not wanting to completely start fresh with a new name despite all the changes that happen. So, but before we dive into that, Jesse, I want to ask you specifically, because you are the OG member of the Road to Milestone, could you give the people listening just a real kind of brief rundown of the Road to Milestone's history for everybody?
Yeah. Ben's super excited to do this. That is a that's a big question.
It's a loaded question.
That is a very loaded question. So funny. 2010, I would say, was really the kickoff for the Road to Milestone. Prior to 2010, it was really just a side project, just a fun little let's get together and jam sort of project. And the name actually arose, like, I would say 6 months before I joined the guys. And shortly after I joined, we had played a Battle of the Bands and ended up winning. And we basically chose the name for it to stick. And hey, we're using this name. This is what we're going to use, and we're going to move forward with it. Yeah, and here we are, 10, 11 years later?
Yeah.
It's
I know, it's crazy, right?
Time flies. Time flies, for sure.
No, it's funny, Jesse, is actually that Battle of the Bands, I was one of the judges at that Battle of the Bands that you guys won. I remember when you just joined that.
Yeah, I always forget that. Yeah. Cool side note, John, current vocalist, who joined us in, what was it, 2014, John? 2015?
would have been December of 2015. I think that's right. That was right before the winter tour in the Texas in July farewell show.
Yeah. So John joined in 2015, but yeah, he was actually. Yeah, that's funny. He was one of the judges that put us through to play Purple Door Music Festival.
Wow, look at that. That's wild. I didn't know that.
You're welcome.
And yeah, 4 or 5 years later, he joins full time to be our vocalist.
He was setting himself up. That's what it was.
I was setting myself up a couple years early, but you know what probably the funniest thing about that was, I think maybe a year or two before that, Jesse had approached me about filling in because the original guy, Ryan, wasn't able to do a couple dates, and then he ended up being able to do the dates. And when he hit me up to initially cover for him, because he had been in the hospital for this winter run and this final Texas in July show, I think it was only 3 or 4 days before the actual show and the run. And
yeah,
I remember being like, yeah, without question, I'll do it. But then I'm like, fuck, man. Like, tomorrow's literally like Christmas. I have 3 days to learn like 8-9 songs.
Yep. In full and play a sold out show.
Yeah. That's big pressure.
Oh yeah.
And then for the fans listening as well, John, actually, I met through working at Guitar Center, I believe. Just random people that worked at Guitar Center. I think it was a coworker, Julie, I think is who it was, that introduced me to John. And John kind of led me into eventually playing drums for the Road to Milestone. And that's kind of how I got introduced into actually playing in the band. However, I was a fan of the band before I actually joined. Which is just a kind of a neat backstory for our relationship and how it's kind of blossomed since then. So that's a really cool backstory of the Road to Milestone, and it kind of shows how the weird coincidences of different people kind of coming into the band's life, kind of setting up, the band for its future success or a future path down which direction it was going to go. So today we're going to talk about, specifically though, what the name of a band means. And we can talk about several different projects and different mediums, but specifically I think today it would be nice for the time we have to talk about specifically what it means for a band in a music realm, what their band name means to them, how important it is to them, is it important to them, and really what does it mean for your band to be titled something, regardless of band member changes, style changes, lyrical changes, all that good jazz. In general, we're going to discuss why we see value in a project's name and identity. I think besides it being what you technically call a project, what does the name really mean to you when you think of the Road to Milestone or another project you do, or as a consumer, what does the project's name mean to you when you listen to something or, in your own personal endeavors? John, I will start with you.
All right. Well, I mean, I went to high school. I grew up with like the majority of the original guys in that band. I mean, when I tell people I'm in the Road to Milestone, there's nothing really personal to the name for me, and I don't think I've ever told Jesse this, but I often find myself being like, man, I know you guys were in high school, but could you have thought of like a cooler name, man?
Don't worry, a lot of bands have thought that.
It's been talked about, John. It's been talked about many times.
Yeah, I'm like, why did you guys have to do 4 words and the last one being like the longest? Like, people are gonna remember it, but like in terms of like throwing it up on like magazines or whatever else. Like I've seen some. I mean, obviously, the Road to Milestone's not the worst name, but like I've seen some shitty band names that like sound like they are the peak performance local band. And always letting people know, hey, big things coming.
Yeah.
Oh man. Oh, hype. No one cares. But I mean, when I think of a band name, and especially in terms of when you're changing sounds and you get a lot of people being like, well, this isn't band anymore. That band was this other sound. Unfortunately, in the music climate now, you almost have to look at when you start a band and you stick to that name. That's you planting the seed in the ground. And as you're doing shows and you're doing promotional and you're getting the name out there, you're growing that tree, and it's spreading roots downward. And so when you go and you have to completely rebrand, I mean, you see it. You don't get the same amount of coverage. You don't get the same, like even with streaming. I mean, if we were to go and, like with this last album, if we had changed the name, guarantee you we wouldn't have gotten the curated playlists offered to us and given to us, placements on those, because they're looking for people who are established. And when you're going in, you're trying to book tours or a show, you want a name that's going to resonate in someone's subconscious, like, oh, I've heard of this band before. Oh, this band is associated with this record label. Oh, this band's done this and that and this and that. If it's a no-name band, like, and you're in a culture of just scrolling, nobody gives a fuck, because, like, they don't have that. First word that comes to mind for me is that preset in the back of their head where they're like, oh, this sets off a ping for me. I should probably check this out. Like, I can guarantee you that there are bands on In Vogue to Interscope that, yeah, they're on this label, but nobody's heard of you. There's no promotion done for you. And so even, like, this new record, we've got some really poppy stuff on it. Whereas you go back to the last record, the one before that, it's a lot of PV 5150 metal and with electronics, and we could totally rebrand and it would make sense for people, because it's like, yeah, this is kind of a different band. But in terms of commercial success in whatever capacity that is for the size we are, the name ultimately equates to reach. What you have done over the years, like, your reach expands over the years. I mean, it's a slow, gradual growth process. So when you rebrand, you kind of snap that off at the root. You pull the roots out of the ground, or you let the tree die.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. I think with my opinion with it has always been that a band name has been, I mean, a brand, if you look at it, just like any other product out there. And it sucks as a creative person because we don't want to think about that element of our creativity. We don't want to put it in terms of dollars and cents or a brand or something that we're trying to sell. But at the end of the day, that is a crossroads, and that is part of what we do, you know, that we have to be a part of and we have to make decisions on. So I definitely agree with that. I mean, even though things may change, even though you might have member changes or a bunch of different style changes, genre changes, whatever the case may be, you know, keeping the brand and keeping the band name that's already established is a smart business move. Jesse, what about you, my friend?
Yeah, I mean, I agreed a lot with what John was saying. I mean, to sort of piggyback off of what I first started talking about, I mean, the road to Milestone, I mean, we were all super young when we started playing music together. And one of the original guitarists, Caleb, he was the one that, was gracious enough to allow me to start jamming with the guys. But the name was very personal at the beginning. It was, funny enough, it was a park, Milestone Park that they called it. And after practices, there'd be a specific road that you'd take to get there. And, when coming up with the name, what do you call it? That's what stuck.
Milestone.
The Road to Milestone.
Didn't.
And it took some different meanings for different people. I mean, we're, not to be like cheesy or anything, but, we're all, striving to hit, certain milestones in our life, going down the road towards those milestones. So, I mean, there's some definitely early personal connection, but as we progressed and sort of became a brand, it becomes a lot bigger than that initial personal connection. Mm-hmm. When the name was first, and that's why I agree with John. It's like, why did we go with the name The Road to Mile? Like, why did that continue?
Yeah.
Shut up, John. I mean, it sort of was like we reached the point of no return. Like, especially after we won that Battle of the Bands, it was like, now this is our name for sure.
Yeah, that's kind of what was official.
Yeah, we have to go forward with this. And, then we got signed to CI Records, put out our first record, and, started gaining local traction, did a few tours, and it just became that brand. And, as we progressed through the years and, some member changes, sound changes and stuff, for me, one of the most important things is reach. Getting your music heard to as many ears as you can. Because for me, it's like I enjoy jamming and playing music by myself, but I personally feel like I have songs and John's more on the lyrics and personal connection that people feel, but I feel like we have something to offer, and I want the most ears to hear it. So nixing the name and starting over, just because we change some sounds or members, it doesn't make sense to me.
Unless you're like ready to pay out big bucks to go to third parties who will send your stuff to playlists to get you the average numbers that'll make Spotify. And unfortunately, that's the reality of it. You got to get the big Spotify audience. You got to get on a curated playlist. So you pay someone to put you on smaller playlists, so you get those boosted numbers that are organic and real. They see that, they throw you on there. So and then if you have to pay into it.
And if you have to start all over again, that's basically literally that. Changing the name means you're basically starting literally all over again. Whereas if you kept the name, you can kind of morph your sound, you can change things in and out, but that established band name, it just means something, for a musical project and, in general. You can do whatever you want, but once you change the actual name, you are literally starting right from scratch. And I know, and it is completely okay with this discussion to talk about the business aspect, because I do personally, part of my opinions on this is that the business aspect plays probably one of the most important parts of generally bands keeping the name that they have, regardless of how many members change in it, if they even have any original members at all at this point. Do they sound exactly like they sounded when they first started? It doesn't matter. They kept the name because that brand recognition is really important if you're trying to make your creative endeavor a long-lasting career or just a career at all. You know what I mean? So I know specifically with the Road to Milestone, when I first joined, A few years in, when we were starting to really buckle down and write this new record, for all of you who haven't heard, shameless plug, we have a new album out called Everything Ends. You should check it out on Spotify. It's really awesome. But when we started doing that album, a lot of things started changing. A lot of sounds were coming out that the band had never done. It was really me and John's first, project that we could work on with the band as full-time members. And the discussion came up. Hey, we've got literally one person who's been in this band since literally almost the beginning, and the sound's changing so much. The songs sound so much different than what we've usually sounded. Should we change the name? Should we shorten it? Should we change it to something completely different? And I know that conversation came up, and there was a lot of different things that got thrown out. But I want to ask you guys, with how important a name is in the brand recognition and what you've mentioned so far, what specifically were your driving purposes behind wanting to keep the Road to Milestone called the Road to Milestone, even though, Jesse, you might have been really the only one with a personal connection to that name?
Yeah.
What was the really driving forces behind wanting to keep the name, even though everything was really changing in this band?
Well,
I can go first, John, if you.
Yeah, go ahead.
If that's good with you.
Yeah,
So early, I would say probably, after we played that Texas in July farewell show, we had that discussion that every band has. Is it time to hang it up? Is it have we done all that we've set out to accomplish? Where are we at in life? And we had that discussion, and maybe took like a couple months break, but we came back, and I think for me, the Road to Milestone is, I've always wanted it to not just, being one of the original members. I've always wanted the Road to Milestone to not just be, about me or the past members, because we have this, brand sort of established, especially in this local area. I've always wanted it to be more of, this creative avenue that, people can use to put, their creative outlet, like music, whether it be music or art, or I've wanted the Road to Milestone, to be used, for new members, old members, as an outlet for them to express themselves. So for me, it's always been more than just the music. I want to.
You know what's funny is that, I think a year ago, I was reading this interview with Corey Taylor from Slipknot, and he was basically saying Slipknot's never gonna die. We could basically just cycle through members, and there will be no original members left, but we'll continue to make albums forever. He basically was saying that the entity itself is so separated from the artist because it is its own thing.
Almost like an institution, or a just a space where you can express your creativity together.
It's a progressing collective pool.
Exactly. Collective pool. That's the good thing.
I mean, you go and you try to find another band name now. You're lucky if you do the most abstract band name with all the apostrophes and everything else, that you find something that hasn't been taken already.
Yeah.
I mean, other shameless plug. I mean, even with Blind Bird, it's a spoken word project that Ben and I have been doing for a couple of years, and that's actually why I first approached Ben. But you go and the only thing that separates our name from there are two other blind birds in the world. There's a Nigerian rapper called Blind Bird. A Nigerian rapper, dude. Like
That's dope.
You could go on the
That's really
internet,
cool.
probably find a band name called Clogged Toilet Fart Box, and it's been taken. Like it's so oversaturated, and everything's already been licensed. It's almost harder to rebrand yourself with something original and untaken than it is to go and craft a record that is nothing like anything you've ever done.
But still keep the same name.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I think, like I mentioned before, I think it does come down to a lot of not just personal attachment, because it does eventually become a creative pool, and it becomes a creative outlet, not just for you personally, if you're the only member or one of the original members of the project. You want it to be an entity of itself, regardless of what it's called. You just want it to kind of be its family, if you will. And then you also do have the business side of it where, hey, rebranding is, let's be real, a lot harder, and all the steam and momentum that you had going with your band name, if you completely just change it up, now you got to start all over again. Now, I want to pose this to you because this is something that me and Ray actually discussed, and to all the viewers, unfortunately, Ray could not be with us. This is my first episode flying solo, but me and Ray discussed this a few conversations back before we recorded this, when in preparation for this. So, in the business aspect of a band name, and this I think is just proving how important it is as a business element. We took Panic at the Disco as an example. Panic at the Disco started out sounding, fueled by Ramen Records, all that awesome, pop punk stuff going on at the time. That's, I guess, what pop punk was called. But, they had that sound. They had numerous people in the band. It was a set, actual, multiple-person band, and they were Panic at the Disco. They sounded like this. Now, over time, obviously, Panic at the Disco is way different than they are when they completely started out. It's actually just one person, if you think about it. It's just Brendan Urie on paper, and he just has other people, I believe, play on the records, and then different people go out on the road with him. So, as an example, Panic at the Disco as an example, do you guys think, as an example for them, do you think if Brendan Urie, when everybody had left and it was just him, do you think instead of keeping the name and going off and just completely doing whatever he wanted to do by himself, but keeping the name that initially was a band, had he just come out with a completely different band name and it was just him and he continued doing the exact same music that he did right now, do you guys think the steam and popularity of Panic at the Disco or Brendan Urie would be where it is now had he changed the name and just dropped Panic at the Disco and started completely fresh? Do you think he would be as popular now?
Absolutely. Yes.
Do you think so? Okay.
Yes. Oh, I know so. Because number one, the dude has a phenomenal voice. They call him Bebo for a reason. The dude has pipes. He has damn near, he has almost perfect pitch. And it's, I saw Panic at the Disco probably 2006 on that Fever You Can't Sweat Out tour. Phenomenal. Couple years later, Ryan Ross and John Smith leave the band. They start a band called Young Veins. This was after Panic put out their second record, and it was basically like an alt Beatles record. So they leave the band and they start a band called Young Veins. Now, Young Veins was essentially just Beatles worship. I saw Young Veins at the Chameleon probably, I think, 2010. Literally Beatles worship. So you see where that Beatles influence, where that was fused into Panic at the Disco on that second record. They leave, they start this band. What happens on the next Panic record? it's back to basic. It's back to basically a fever you can't sweat out, but a progression of that, and they continued to climb because of Brendan, and Spencer was still in the band. You go up to the next record, Spencer's still in the band with him. He leaves because of some drug problems. They put out another record, and Brendan's literally, absolutely murdering it. So, like, if one by one, through each record cycle, an original member leaves, and you see artistically what affected that, and you still see Panic at the Disco on an upward trajectory, what really is Panic at the Disco at the end of the day? It's the allure of his voice, regardless of if you have, like, Las Vegas burlesque alt-punk from the first record, to Beatles, to a more progressed emo rock, to this really classy, like, prog rock Frank Sinatra that he's become. Like, his voice has carried it, and it's only gotten better and better and better. Like, if you've ever heard his falsetto notes.
Oh, and I completely agree. I think in context of that question, I think Brendan Urie, full disclosure, would have been a success no matter what he did, no matter what he branded himself, or if he just went by Brendan Urie. I guess my question posed is, at you taken what, 3 albums in, and that's when most of the Panic at the Disco members had left, and it was just kind of down to him and the drummer, and then the drummer left. And at that point in time, how many people did you think would have literally stopped listening, maybe just because it was a different name, not necessarily because they didn't want to follow Brendan Urie, but because the name ended and they maybe didn't catch the news of the new project? You know what I mean? And I think the name plays that importance in it, because I bet you, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but I bet you Brendan Urie, when he was coming to that solo, oh man, it's just down to me, I bet you he had that conversation in his head or with management or with other people. Do I change the name of this band? Does this band name really mean anything to me anymore? And I think a lot of projects come to that, not just him, not just Panic at the Disco as an example, but even the Road to Milestone as another example. It came down to, there's no more original members left. How important does the name really mean? And does changing it, is it worth doing? You know what I mean? And I feel like had Panic at the Disco, had Brendan Urie completely changed the name, yes, he would have been a success, but I think there would have been a big percentage of fans of that band who wouldn't have technically followed his next project per se, because it wasn't branded Panic at the Disco. You know what I mean? It was something different. It was a different avenue. Yeah. It sounded different. Now there's an excuse. Oh, he changed the name. That it doesn't sound like Panic at the Disco. This isn't really my cup of tea. I don't really like it. Whatever, whereas because he always kept the Panic at the Disco name, you can kind of evolve with them. You can kind of change with them. You're a fan of the band since the beginning. You have emotional connections to some of their early stuff, and you want to stick with that band. You want to stick with that project. So I think, in my opinion, that it was smart to keep the name, because the emotional attachment that a lot of Panic at the Disco fans from the very beginning have with that band, even though the sound has changed completely and Brendan is the only original member, I feel like they've embraced the new sound changes better. Had he just dropped the name, started something completely different, well, now there's an excuse to not like the new change in sound, because, he wanted to sound something different. It's not Panic at the Disco. So now you're not really going to follow it as much. You see where I'm going? Yeah. And that's kind of my opinion with it.
But I mean, too, like what that also comes down to on the other side of it is, Panic is a great template for this conversation, because people will eat whatever you put in front of their face. Like, a cat will eat whatever food you give it because that's what's in front of it. So, like, great example. Dallin Weeks. He was the guitarist for Panic at the Disco from, I think, like the end of that third album cycle up till this very last album cycle. He left and he started a band called I Don't Even Know Anymore. Yeah. It's like IDEKA or something like that. It's like something like that. And like, realistically, no one would have gave a shit. But like him coming out of Panic, he had the business team behind him where like he could make whatever he wanted, and as long as they had the resources, they can put that music in front of the public's face, and they're going to pay attention to that before they pay attention to any other band. Like say Young Banes didn't even get half the promotion.
Yeah.
Because of how much smaller they were at the time.
But I will say, to this point, that kind of, in a weird way, proves my point, because those original members separated from that project. They changed the name of what they were doing creatively. They were no longer part of Panic at the Disco. Yeah, they were playing, like in Young Vane's case, they were playing music that was very similar to what the second record of Panic at the Disco was, very Beatles-esque. Yet, they changed the name. Okay, this really isn't what I want to listen to. I know it's some people that played in Panic at the Disco, but yeah. So they didn't end up being on the massive stage that Panic at the Disco is, because I feel like Panic at the Disco name, it really started gaining some steam, and it was smart to stick with that steam and momentum that was rolling, even though there was no one else around that was originally in the band except Brendan. Because why not? Let's keep that train rolling, even though we're changing direction and changing sound, because we have that momentum going already, instead of coming to a complete stop and then having to build it all back up again. Because that's a prime example. You don't really hear about those two projects anymore, as much as you do the main initial Panic at the Disco project.
Well, that was the other thing, too, because in 2010, like, streaming was not a thing. Like, Spotify didn't really start picking up steam till probably 2012. Mm-hmm. And so, with the introduction of streaming, having the control of what gets put in front of people's faces, like that's streaming. Mm-hmm. And that wasn't a thing back then, so they got pressed through early Facebook and MySpace, which again, the whole reach algorithm on that template is completely different than Spotify. Mm-hmm. Everybody uses Spotify now,
Yeah. And there's definitely a lot of different like technological advances that I think are available now that, had they had the advantage of at that point, would have helped them, you know what I mean? So, I think there's a lot of technical advantages that a band has nowadays that, gives, had Young Vanes probably had the same promotional advantages that maybe they had now, they probably would have picked up a bit more steam. But look at Panic at the Disco. They kind of stuck around no matter what.
Side note on Panic at the Disco. Am I imagining things? But I swear that they dropped the exclamation point for a record cycle.
I think they did. Yeah, they dropped it specifically.
Yeah.
And hopefully we don't get sued by them, but for like us, the podcast, because we've talked about them so much. I feel like we've said their name a lot.
Well, if we get sued, we might as well already.
The podcast might owe them money now.
If they're gonna charge us money, let's just go ahead and
they won't charge you money.
On blast.
They'll charge me and Ray money.
One dude's got a mugshot.
But you're right, though. I do think they did drop the exclamation point. I think it was after the first or second record, I think.
Yeah, but then they brought it back because, that brand recognition.
Yeah, man. That's a classic huge. Example.
It's huge.
It really is.
I mean, another band that comes to mind is Under Oath.
Mm-hmm. Like that's a big one.
That's a huge one that they kept the name for so long, and I'm honestly surprised that when they announced their breakup whenever that was, 2016, 2014, something like that.
2013.
2013. Wow.
Wow.
Yeah, you and I went to that show together.
I did. Yeah, that was fantastic. I'm actually surprised that Spencer didn't carry on, because he wanted to. He was the only one that wanted to at that time.
Sleepwave.
Yeah.
Yeah, he changed his sleep, but he went from playing, 1,000 cap venues to Sleepwave playing in front of 50 people.
Another example.
I don't know. I don't know. I saw Sleepwave at the Chameleon Club with We Came as Romans and Slaves and Chietos for this one show, and it was basically sold out. Everybody was there watching Sleepwave.
And that's not to, to chime in. That's not to discredit that these projects are not good. Like, obviously,
They're just not as good.
Yeah, I mean, it just really goes to show that, you might be from this really popular band, and you might be the main person from that band, but look how hard it is even for the front man of a well-established, very established actually, band to come out with a completely new band while the other band is still potentially going. You know, because at the time you were like, I don't know, Under Oath, what are they going to do? You know, even that is an example. Look how hard it is to gain the same momentum, because you have to start basically at a stop position, I feel like, even if you're the front man, or the original shining member of the musical project. And that's just another example. Just look how hard it is. So that's not to discredit that their music isn't good or that they're not doing a good job. It just really goes to show that when a creative project happens, that band name, really makes a difference, and that really will hold a lot of weight to a band's project going forward. But despite member changes, despite sound changes, despite, lyrical tone, you might go from, in the Road to Milestone's case, pretty much a very Christian-leaning band into not being that anymore. And that was a big change as well.
Sorry, Jesse.
It's okay. It's okay. But that doesn't mean that the people in the band have changed. It just means that this band name is just taking on a different form. It's just taking on a different shade. And that's okay, because in a business sense, it's okay for this band to exist with different people in it from the original days. It's okay for it to exist as an entity for other people, like you said, Jesse, earlier, to come in, experience the family that is the Road to Milestone or whatever the band may be. Yeah, and even though they're not original members, and even though it might completely be different sounding than it was originally, that name, it's a family in some instances. And it's also, like we said, a business decision, and it's a brand, and that's okay as well. And I think creative people out there sometimes feel bad because they think about the business side of it, but it's okay, because the band's name is a really important thing. Now, I will ask you, though, during all the challenges that arose with the Road to Milestone, during the, even the few years of hiatus that happened, what were some things that you had to cope with, especially when you thought things might have ended and it might not be happening, or it might be happening under a different name or something. Did you feel like when, Jesse, I guess this kind of goes to you, when you felt like the Road to Milestone, the project, was coming to an end, did you feel like it was important for you, if you were going to start something new, to start it as the Road to Milestone? Or did you feel like, that needed to end? You know what I mean? How did you cope with that?
I mean, it was hard when we had the initial conversations about, we played like a undisclosed last show together, and we had the discussion. Is this done? Are we wrapping this? Do we want to continue? Do some of us want to continue? How should we leave it? And me selfishly, at the time, maybe a little too selfishly, I felt, as one of the primary writers in regards to the music and, and even in the business sense, sort of running the show behind the scenes. I felt a lot of ownership to the band and felt a lot of connection to the name, just from all, you start thinking back in all the memories, all the time that you put into it, everything that you put into it.
Very true.
And we took a, all the original members, we decided, we're going to stop for a little bit, see what happens. But then we got a huge show offer, and it sort of sparked. We had a couple months to think about things, and do we want to keep creating or whatever? But then we got a big show offer. I believe it was the August Burns Red Christmas show, and it sort of sparked that. You know what? I'm not done being creative. Even if we can't go on like a month-long tour anymore, or if it's a little bit harder to do that, even if things don't look the same, I still want to reach as many people as possible, and I still want to create. So it's like not putting an end to this name, into this brand that was started, that was very important to me.
Yeah, the pride behind it. And even though things might look different, it meant a lot to you. And I know it still means a lot to you. And, I'm personally very honored to be able to share that with you, because I myself know how it is to have a band that means a lot to me and have a lot of revolving members. And even though things were changing, we felt it was really important to, keep the name, because it meant something to not just us, but also the community around us. We had a lot of fans and friends that they connected with that name. They had a lot of memories with songs or shows or whatever the case may be, discussions with us at the merch table, discussion with us, outside of shows. And, that meant a lot to them. And so even though we had a lot of changes, we kept that name going. And so I completely understood why the Road to Milestone kept the name, and I completely understand why other projects out there keep the name, even though a lot of the horizons ends up changing, a lot of the landscapes end up changing. But yeah, I think that's a big thing that happens, even though a band ends and they have to really maybe refocus if they want to come out of retirement. So that's really good. That's really good insight into that. I will say this though, we'll get on a last question for you guys. I'll start with you, John, on this. How important, Jesse, you discussed how important it was for you to bring back something that really meant a lot to you, even though it wasn't the same members. It meant something to you, and you were like, you know what, I still got something in me creatively. I'll start with you, John. How does it feel to you when you look at a project, or when you have a project personally that you're a part of? How important should the project's actual name be? Do you think it completely sets the tone for what the first impression of a band is? Or do you simply find it as an identifier, and you should just let the music speak for itself? You might have a goofy name or whatever. That doesn't matter. Let the music speak for itself, no matter what I think about the name. How important do you think that actual name is?
I think at the end of the day, if you're looking at listeners and fans, it all depends on what the individual fan, streamer, whoever pays attention to. Because there are some people that are drawn in by a name. There are some people that are drawn in from the first 10 seconds from listening on streaming. For me, I think from an artistic side, yeah, I want it to kind of roll with the sound and all that, but
be catchy.
At the end of the day, where I'm at right now, I don't give a shit. I'll name a side project I'm working on right now. I'll call it whatever fucking forever. Like, like great example. There's this new, essentially unannounced Anthony Green side project that he kept his name completely separated from it. He hasn't really just straight up announced that, like, oh, this is an Anthony Green project. He basically everybody in that now early emo rock scene, like the main Taking Back Sunday and everybody, just posts this super ambiguous video and a link to a Bandcamp for a band called Fucking Whatever. It's literally called Fucking Whatever. And you go to the link, and it's one song. And it is the most vibey, groovy, like, probably some of the best stuff I've ever heard from Anthony Green. But at the end of the day, like, he knows he's good at what he does. And I think for a lot of people, they reach a point artistically, like, they just don't give a shit about who hears it anymore. They just need to get it out of their system.
Yeah. And do you think that band name made you want to check them out, or did you just simply shrug it off? Do you see the argument in people just shrugging it off as a silly name and not wanting to listen to it?
Again, it's how you push it. Because I was literally on Instagram, and it was just like one afternoon, Pat, the drummer from the Maine, Adam Lazara from Taking Back Sunday, and like one other person from some other random band, probably like I don't know, somebody from Thursday. Mm-hmm. They all posted the same video with just a link out of nowhere, and I'm like, this is weird. I have no idea like what or who this is, or if it's anybody actually like worth listening to, or somebody with a big name. But like, I'm just listening to this video and I'm vibing to it. So I'm like, all right, I'll click it. And it didn't even announce the band name. You have to kind of like look through the Bandcamp to find out that like it's done by a band called Fucking Whatever, and it doesn't list any band members on this thing. I still don't know who else is in the project.
Yeah. So the vibe of the music really kind of overshadowed the band name. So the band name could be called whatever, but because you really dug the music and what was actually churning out, they could be called whatever, right?
It's how you push it.
Yeah,
it's how you push
it
it to the masses. Like you get a bunch of random people from a bunch of bands just like randomly doing it, throwing a link in there with no like context. Like that's smart.
Mm-hmm.
It had nothing to do with the name.
To me, yeah. I mean, band names at this point, and like John touched on, earlier, it's like every name is taken.
Yeah,
every single name is taken.
You got like countries. You have to put the country code in now if you have the same band name.
It's like at this point, it's like for me, I barely even like I don't even care the band name. Mm-hmm. It's like, give me a good song.
Yeah,
something I can vibe to. It's like the days of the connecting band names to the style, maybe it gets a little, especially in the rap genre, you have to be a little more specific to connect, but for rock and roll, and pop and you can name yourself anything.
Yeah.
The world is yours.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think different genres have, different levels of importance to a band name. But I think we've touched on a lot of really cool things. The Road to Milestone to me, as a newbie member, I guess if you would look at it, because I'm besides I think our bass player Caleb, I'm the newest member. Even though I don't have personal connection to the name, Jesse, like you touched on. There is that family feel to it. I've become immense friends with you and John, as well as John and the other project, Blind Bird, that we do together. And even though I don't have the personal connection to the name necessarily like Jesse does to the Road to Milestone or John does to Blind Bird, it is that family. It's that name to the place that I can go to be creative. And it's okay for that to change. It's okay for that to evolve. And also in the business sense, it's okay to keep the momentum going, and to keep yourself successful, to keep yourself inspired, and to keep yourself going. And I think the road to Milestone, time and time again, just not, being a fan and then eventually being a member, has shown that through that test of time and all the trials and tribulations, it's okay to stick with the name, because smart business decision, but it's also a family, it's a brand, it's something that the community around them relates to, and changing it up and completely having to create a whole new world would be cool, and it's a nice venture to go down, but it would literally be starting completely from scratch, and that causes a whole bunch of different stresses and anxieties that we haven't touched on today. But I will say, wrapping up, I would like to once again thank you guys for being on this podcast with me. Thank you for bearing with me through this solo performance without my trusty partner Ray with us. But my last thing that I would like to get from you guys is, with all the different things we've talked about, the importance of the name of a creative project, specifically with a band name, what encouragement would you give to bands that are either going through it, have went through it, or young bands that might go through it, when they feel like they hit those crossroads where they might feel like, hey, should we change up the identity of our band, specifically the band name? When they hit those crossroads, when they hit those decisions where they have to think about that because some major change is happening, with all the different things that the Road to Milestone personally, individually, and as a unit had to go through, what encouragements would you give to bands out there when they're having to go through that decision?
Stop giving so much of a shit. like it will literally suck the fun and creativity out of you. There were so many times when, especially with Jesse and I kind of run the show for the past few years, where it would become so much between producer issues, trying to get things done, nothing turning out right, where I was just I'm so ready to just stop. And I shouldn't have got to that point. As somebody who is an art, I would call myself somebody who is a creative, and you should never get to that point. If you get to a point where you are so stressed out about it and you're at that crossroads and you don't know what to do, stop giving a shit. Stop thinking about it. And go back to making your art and allow yourself to be creative and purge that stuff out, because once you do that, eventually you'll have the answer for yourself. But you're not going to get it by continuing to pound on the door.
Yeah. That's good stuff.
Yeah.
That's good stuff.
You'll ruin it for yourself.
Yeah, for sure. And, and every situation's different. I mean, I think, I think for us, open dialogue is, the most important, and especially if you have a group of, guys or girls or, that you're close with and that you trust, just be honest with each other. What do you want? What do you want out of the project? What do you want, creatively? How do you want to move forward or not move forward? Just being honest with each other, and, the truth will come out, and, you'll see the path forward.
Mm-hmm. And how important that name is to you. How important does that relate to what you want to do going forward?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
For sure.
Well, dude, I appreciate you guys so much for coming on this podcast. Jesse, Jonathan, it's been wonderful talking to you about this, topic that, again, not a lot of people really talk about. It's something that you have, amongst each other, people in the industry, band members and stuff like that. You talk about it amongst each other, but you never really have a kind of public, out in the open conversation about just how important a project's band name means to that band in a musical aspect. So I do appreciate you guys coming on to the podcast and having this discussion with me.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Side
note, Oh, like one last note. So, like on the whole like topic of how hard it is to find a band name. When I said Lil Toot earlier, I just went on the internet now. There's literally a SoundCloud rapper called Lil Toot. He has songs he has songs like the Kiss Your Sister competition in Alabama 2019.
Oh my Lord!
Like everything is taken.
You literally proved the point that everything is taken. Oh my
go
gosh.
look up Lil Toot on SoundCloud. Don't do it. No, don't look him up. He has 49 followers. He's not interested.
He's not that interested. Awesome, guys. Well, I do appreciate it. For everyone out there, if you've enjoyed the conversation, go out and see our new album. It's all over any streaming site that you go get music from. It's The Road to Milestone. The album's called Everything Ends. We would very much appreciate you going out and listening to the album if you haven't done so already. Download it, tell a friend about it, tell a family member about it. And again, Jesse and Jonathan, thank you so much for joining me today. And for everyone else out there, we will see you soon.
So that's the show. Thanks to John and Jesse for joining us. Check out The Road to Milestone on Spotify. Connect with them on Instagram. And while you're on there, follow the podcast on Instagram at Decoding the Creative, all one word. Our logo design is by Dana Gray Studio. Our intro music was created by me, Ray Hartsfield. Make sure to subscribe and rate the podcast because it really helps. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you soon.